A 2-year ban or a 2-year steroid cycle? Fred Kerley has officially been banned for 2 years by the AIU for missing his 3rd drug test in 12 months and will be barred from competition until August 11th, 2027. And almost immediately after it was originally announced that Fred had missed his 3rd test in 12 months, Fred announced that he was signed by the Enhanced Games, which, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's basically the Olympics, but you're allowed to take performance-enhancing drugs, and it's going to take place this year in May. And at the games, Fred said he's going to set a new world record for the 100 meters, calling it Project 9.42. And once Fred's participation was announced, immediate speculation ensued on whether Fred was going to start taking PEDs or not, and whether he has in his professional career so far. And Fred followed this up by claiming not only is he going to run 9.42 seconds in the 100, he's going to do it clean. He's not going to take any performance-enhancing drugs. And that when his suspension is up in 2027, he is going to compete in the LA Olympics in 2028 and bring home the gold medal in the 100. And this confirms that Fred has every intention on coming back to compete under World Athletics once his suspension is done. And logically speaking, this might be the best time to train on steroids. But let's put the Enhanced Games to the side for a second and ask a very important question. Does drug testing scrutiny stay the same when an athlete is serving a ban? I don't think so. First off, half the athletes who have ever tested positive for PEDs have done so on in-competition testing, which means in the competition where they perform, they were drug tested after or before. Since athletes who are banned from competing can't compete under World Athletics, they can't test positive for an in-competition test. They can't get tested, period. So this leaves out of competition testing the only time suspended athletes could get tested. And if you're a suspended athlete that's no longer in a registered testing pool, I'm not even sure if you have to provide your whereabouts, meaning the drug testers don't even know where you are. And furthermore, you can speculate that even if they are banned and are in a registered testing pool, they're still not tested at the same scrutiny as athletes that are competing. And if an athlete is not held to the same standard of providing their whereabouts, or if their frequency of testing goes way down, it's going to be harder to catch them if they decide to use steroids or any other PEDs. Athletes who are a part of a national or international registered testing pool are obligated to provide their whereabouts, meaning where they are at all times of the day, through a system called ADAMS, which is an athlete's profile. And every athlete has to fill out where they're going to be 3 months in advance in 60-minute increments for the next 3 months. And as of right now, Fred Kerley is part of the AIU's registered testing pool, and if you believe him, he's been tested since it was originally announced that he failed his whereabouts. Since Kerley's suspension was only announced days ago, he would be on the AIU's registered testing pool list, considering the list was made before the official suspension. There's a similar situation to Alicia Newman, who's a Canadian Olympic medalist pole vaulter, who also failed for her whereabouts. She's in the registered testing pool for Canada, but her official sentence was only within the last month or so. So the national registered testing pool was made before that, so she's on it. But both Kerley and Newman might be removed from the registered testing pool as WADA and national testing federations prioritize testing actual athletes competing, which, if you've been following along, creates a potential loophole for drug abuse. Out of every single track and field athlete throughout our sports history that has had a doping or doping-related offense, which is over 2,000 of them, I can find only one that's had a whereabouts suspension while already being suspended. That was Mohamedou of France, who was serving a 9-month suspension when he failed his whereabouts. And 9 months is way shorter than the typical 24-month ban that most athletes face, so it makes sense that he was still being tested. And out of the same 2,000 athletes who have a doping-related offense, I can only find one athlete who tested positive for a drug while suspended, which was a Russian 1500-meter runner named Sharima, who was serving a 3-year drug suspension when she tested positive for another undisclosed drug, and therefore her suspension was made even longer. So what does this tell us? Many of these athletes came back to compete, and in some cases, tested positive for doping for a 2nd time, or even a 3rd time. This tells us that a lot of these athletes took PEDs in their suspension because of the relaxed drug testing protocols. An example of this scrutiny loophole, if you look at the Canadian registered testing pool in 2026, you'll only find 2 Canadians who are serving a doping-related offense. One of them being Alicia Newman, as we talked about, and another being Shania Bedward, who is a weightlifter, whose period of ineligibility is up in September of this year. And again, when this list was made, Alicia had not been officially suspended yet, so she might not even be on the next list. Now, if you look at the Canadian athletes who are currently serving doping-related offenses, It's a lot more than 2 people. And some of them are probably going to want to compete again. Does this mean they're using drugs? No. But they probably could if they wanted to. I would do the same analysis on the USA's registered testing pool, but they don't make their national testing pool public. My whole point here is that out-of-competition drug testing is not nearly as stringent on athletes serving suspensions as it is on elite athletes competing right now, even outright non-existent in some cases. And this would be a perfect window for athletes to dope and not get caught. So if you're Fred Kerley or another athlete that's serving a period of ineligibility, what's stopping you from taking steroids in your period of suspension, keeping most of your training adaptation, and then coming off cycle when you return to your sport better than ever? And in Fred Kerley's case in particular, training for the enhanced games, being rewarded, and then going to compete in LA 2028. There's also nothing stopping Marvin Bracey or Arian Knighton from doing the same thing. Those are 2 American sprinter athletes who are currently banned for doping-related offenses, though much longer than Fred Kerley's. In Bracey's and Knighton's case, 4 years is a lot longer than 2 years, so they will have to be extra motivated to come back. But it's still possible, and the point still stands. Furthermore, Knighton and Bracey are not in the AIU's registered testing pool, and we don't know who is on the USA's national registered testing pool. So if Bracey and Knighton aren't on that list, how frequently are they actually getting tested? Again, this is just speculation. A very notable athlete who came back better than ever after a 4-year suspension was Justin Gatlin, and he got popped twice in his career. Was he doping during his 4-year ban for testosterone use, coming back faster than ever in his 30s? Or even during the period into his 30s? I don't have an answer to that, but you can speculate that the answer might be yes. There are a ton of loopholes to use performance-enhancing drugs in track and field, and using them while you're suspended is one of them. And so is abusing the whereabouts system, which is the most glaring loophole. If you're on drugs and you know you're going to test positive in a drug test during a certain period of time, then you tell your anti-doping authority you're somewhere else than you actually are. You miss the test. You miss 2 tests. And on the 3rd test, you better be where you say you are. But the advantage for PED users is that every 12 months, the 3 whereabouts failures resets, meaning you can miss another 3 tests, and then the cycle continues. And that brings us back to Fred Kerley, banned for his whereabouts. Recently, he's been posting pictures of him and HRT and longevity doctors who claim testosterone isn't doping if you have medical oversight.
Medicine is basically just doping with a medical label. When they hear about things like testosterone therapy, peptides, or optimization protocols, which you know a lot about, they assume it's kind of the same thing. Is that a fair comparison?
I understand why people make that comparison, but medically, it's not accurate. When physicians talk about doping, they usually mean the unsupervised or reckless use of performance-enhancing drugs without the proper medical oversight or the long-term monitoring when practiced responsibly.
And to be clear, what Dr. Martin says to be doping and what WADA considers doping are directly conflicting. Fred is also posting videos of him running 9.6 seconds for the 100 meters in practice, which in all fairness is probably an embellishment. He's also threatening people with legal action who are accusing him of drug use. Classic Lance Armstrong defense, get really aggressive and sue. At the end of the day, Kerley joined a business that sells HRT and longevity drugs, most of which are banned by WADA. Almost all drugs and peptides provided by the enhanced games are banned by WADA. Fairly or unfairly, it's just the way it is. Which, if you put all of this together on speculating whether Fred Kerley was using or it has the intention of using drugs, leans you towards yes. Personally, I won't speculate if I think Fred was on anything or not. I'm just reporting the facts. But the facts don't look convincing that he's a clean athlete. However, Fred didn't actually fail a drug test, so we don't know for sure. And in Fred's defense, a lot of his criticism on track and field and drug testing is absolutely spot on. The whereabouts system is burdensome and easy to mess up as an athlete. Knowing where you're going to be every day for 3 months in advance in 60-minute increments is just difficult, especially in a sport like track and field where everything is always up in the air. Track meets are canceled all the time. Events in track meets are canceled all the time. Flights are delayed. Flights are canceled. There are genuine reasons to miss a random drug test or to fail to report in a timely manner where you are. And in an interview with Fred on the Nightcap podcast back in September, Fred says he has no endorsements, which means he's not getting paid when he's not racing. Yet he's still responsible for letting drug testers know where he is at all times and to make himself available to them. That's an unpaid liability at the end of the day. And Shannon Sharp says it the best on the Nightcap podcast. If Fred decides to compete in the enhanced games, he will most likely be banned for life, or World Athletics will pursue that route. Sebastian Coe, the head of World Athletics, said it himself. This shows you the state of track and field even for our biggest stars. If it was so lucrative to compete in World Athletics sanctioned events, then there would be no need for Fred to compete in the enhanced games. He would serve a suspension, go back to competing, and start making money again. But risking competing in the enhanced games to Fred is obviously worth it, or else he wouldn't have signed, because he's not compensated like other professional athletes in different leagues. And I'll take Fred's criticisms even a step further. Why are track and field athletes and other amateur sports athletes held to such a higher standard of drug testing scrutiny compared to any other professional sport? We're an amateur sport captured by these international associations and national federations that milk every dollar from their athletes by signing deals with private companies at the expense of their athletes. Being a top 20 1500 meter runner in the world is nothing compared to being a top 20 quarterback. It's not even in the same stratosphere. Yet even these professional athletes in these pro sports leagues aren't held to the same standard as amateur sports athletes are. There are over 2,000 athletes who have tested positive for doping in track and field since around 50 years ago. How many are in the NBA? 35? At least the NFL tests their athletes to a degree, but the consequences of testing positive for doping are laughable compared to the consequences amateur sports athletes face when they test positive. Either they're not tested for the same substances, their testing is way worse, they're not tested as frequently, or there's collusion at the top to keep their athletes clean, or a mixture of all of it. Track and field athletes are broke, and the doping rules are draconian compared to professional sports. And then the strangulating rules and incompetency of these organizations that majorly affect athletes on the top make it just so much worse. I understand why Fred Kerley is upset, especially if he's clean. Beyond a select few, you're pretty much paying for the privilege to compete in the sport that you love, through money, effort, and time. There are track and field athletes not allowed to compete at global competitions because they weren't tested enough beforehand. There are athletes sponsored by Brooks who can't wear their sponsors and were barred from competing at World Championships because USA Track and Field is sponsored by Nike. And when you're busy training and scraping by and living with your parents, you have to let an organization know where you are at all times and make yourself available to them, or else you can't compete at all. Even in Fred's case, who's a superstar, has to update his atoms to let these organizations know where he is at all times. And obviously he failed to do so. And he has to do this even when he's not making money. You have to absolutely hustle on top of training full-time to make a living in track and field. And it can all be taken away in a moment because of stringent rules no other professional sports have. So again, yeah, I do understand why Fred's infuriated. But if Fred does want to use PEDs in the next 2 years, he's gonna have a hard time. I have a feeling he will remain on the registered testing pools so these organizations can prove a point, and Fred will still be drug tested. And this is mostly because he's going to be competing in the enhanced games, and World Athletics and WADA wants to send a message. Regardless of what happens, I do hope Fred sets a world record at the enhanced games. I think it would be great for the sport, but that's a story for another time. And on that note, I'll see you guys next time.